In the book of Lamentations this evening. We just finished the book of Jeremiah, and I mentioned last week that the final chapter of Jeremiah really kind of can place itself as kind of a preface, a introduction even to Lamentations, or you can take Lamentations and place it as a response to the final chapter of Jeremiah. Because Lamentations is written by the same person, by Jeremiah, and Jeremiah writes it in response to the destruction of Jerusalem and the captivity of Judah. He's writing the book, and I say a book, it really, we don't really get it within, necessarily within the English language, but it's similar to the same thing as we see in Psalms. It's really written in a poetical kind of way in which the chapters begin, each verse begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. If I'm remembering correctly now, I think it's one of the chapters it still uses the Hebrew alphabet, but it does it in a unique sort of way that I'm not remembering all the details of it now. But it is, in its original state, almost a kind of a poetical kind of book. But it is written as a response, as I said, in response to the destruction of Jerusalem. You know, one of the things that Jeremiah dealt with during his ministry was a lot of persecution because of the messages that he preached. The messages that Jeremiah preached was, hey guys, because of your sin, the Lord's going to come. He's going to destroy Judah. He's going to destroy Jerusalem. And all of you are going to be taken into captivity. And there's going to be nothing that's left. And your only hope for survival is just to give yourself up. If you try and fight, if you try and stand against, it's going to be worse for you. You might as well just go. Don't try and run. Don't try and call other nations. Just surrender. That's your only option. And so, naturally, a lot of people would respond in kind by saying, Jeremiah does not care for the nation of Judah. He is not a good citizen of Judah. He's for the Babylonians. But when we look in Lamentations, we see the way that he writes about it, and it's made very abundant. And we see it in Jeremiah as well. The sorrow he feels, that Jeremiah was not on Babylon's side. Jeremiah was on Judah's side. Jeremiah was on Judah's side while being also on the Lord's side, which didn't always line up with what the people of Judah thought or wanted. It did not meet up with many of the false prophets of Jeremiah's time, of what the kings desired. It was very much so, he was hated because of the messages that he was speaking. But he did care very much so for Judah. He cared very much so for Jerusalem, towards the city of David. And so upon seeing the destruction of it, he leaves Jeremiah in a very saddened state, a very upset state because of what has taken place. And we see this in Lamentations. We see his care. And I think this is important because we see Jeremiah's response. We see him, and even in this chapter we see this, that he cared very much so for the people of Judah. He cared for his countrymen. He didn't allow he was not happy with the sin that was going on. He wasn't happy with the things that were taking place. But he still very much so cared for them and loved them and wanted the very best for them. We see his great concern for this. He's not just upset because this is the Lord's land or this is supposed to be the Lord's people. He's upset because it's his own countrymen too. He's upset in two different ways, because of the Lord, but then also because of them being his brothers and sisters as countrymen. It's easy when looking at, I don't know if it's, I would say it is easy because of our sin nature. It is easy because of our sin nature with those that are walking in sin and those that are leading a nation to destruction. Even in looking today, you can see people that are doing this. And it can be very easy to disconnect from them, and to not care about them, and to just want to be saying good riddance to them. Or, we see it at times within the news. There's been different groups that come along that go around telling people that all of this is bad stuff is happening because of what your sins are doing, and being very hateful towards people. And you can tell that they don't actually care about the people that they're talking to. Jeremiah cared. They cared, I would say, like the Lord cares. Because you look at Christ and how He responded to those that hated Him, wanted to murder Him, wanted to kill Him, those that were walking in sin, which was everybody. And He responded by dying for them because of His love. Looking at people that are in sin, or looking to people that are making mistakes, or people that are making poor choices, and responding in kind with hate is not an emotion, is not an attitude that the Lord has. It should not be an attitude that we have. And so I think this gives us an insight as to while it's Jeremiah that writes this, of course it is inspired by the Lord. I think as well it can help to give us an insight to the way of the Lord, those that are lost in their sin. Let's go ahead and have a word of prayer, and then we will begin this. Lord, I thank You that we have this opportunity to be here this evening, to be able to study Your Word, to be able to learn from You, to be able to see, just to be able to have Your Word and be able to study it freely is such an amazing gift. And I pray that You would help us to take full advantage of this time, to be fruitful with this time here, that we would soften our hearts and clear our minds, that we can just listen to Your Word and the application of Your Word, Holy Spirit. And we can be changed, and we can grow, and we can be closer with You. As You would guide and direct me as I teach Your Word, that everything ultimately would be for Your honor, glory, and Your will. In Jesus' name, amen. Beginning here in Lamentations chapter 1, verse 1, it says, "How doth the city sit solitary, that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations and princes among the provinces, how is she become tributary?" He begins writing, and he's observing the emptiness of Jerusalem. Jerusalem as a city is now alone. That there's nobody left in it. Most of them were taken into captivity, and then the city itself was burned down and leveled and destroyed. There's nothing left. It is a desert place. You notice that Jeremiah talks about them, and he says that she was a great among the nations. She's a great and wonderful nation. Powerful one at one point. You go back to the time of David, and you go back to the time of Solomon, the greatest years of Israel's history. A nation that was underneath the rule of Solomon was so great that people were coming and giving him money. People were coming just to see this great nation and the leader that was there. A nation that was respected and feared even before they became a nation in the Promised Land. And coming into Jericho, first coming in, people were already fearful of them. because they knew of their God. They knew of this powerful nation. It was always meant to be great, to continue that way. Yeah, we see even in the prophecies concerning the end times and what's going to take place with Israel. The Lord's going to establish Israel to a glory like none other. Be the greatest point in their life. That shows where the Lord desired them to be as a nation. But because of their sin, that's not where they went. See, too, she weepeth sore in the night. Her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. He describes that there is nothing good left behind, it seems. All hope is lost here. There's just sorrow in it. And notice this. It says, among all her lovers, she hath none to comfort her. Who are we talking about with these lovers? We're talking about the false idols that they were worshiping. Time and time again, the Lord described those other idols as them committing adultery with the Lord, going a-whoring after other gods. He's talking about their other lovers, these false idols that they look to try and help them, to try and save them, and to do all these things that they gave all of this glory to as being the reason for their prosperity. And now they had no power because they never had any power to begin with. Those lovers, they can do nothing to save. And it says, and all her friends have dealt treacherously with her. Another thing that they went doing is they went finding other nations to be their allies, to be their friends, to help them. They looked at times to Egypt, to the Assyrians, to others, thinking, hey, they're going to help us. This is a good thing. But those friends were unable to do anything for them, and they all turned on them. What you see here in this verse is that two different areas that they went to, that they looked to, that they had confidence in for their strength, for their help to be able to do it. And it's pointed out here that they have no ability to do anything for them. They looked to both of those instead of the Lord, and those things had no power, and so they failed. Verse 3. This is Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction, and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She findeth no rest. All her persecutors overtook her between straits. It continues to write, they've been taken into captivity to afflict them, to punish them for what has been done. We've been taken, instead of being a nation that is, as he talked about in verse 1, of being such a great nation, now they are a nation that is great in servitude, and that is not able to stay in their homeland, but has been transferred and been taken to other nations. Been taken away. They are not even allowed to live in their own homes anymore. There is no rest for them, because they've been overtaken in every way. Again, this is all here because they refuse to look to the Lord, who is their rest, their refuge, their protector, their strength, their comfort. Continues in 4, it says, the ways of Zion do mourn, because none come to the solemn feast. All her gates are desolate. Her priests sigh, her virgins are afflicted, and she is in bitterness. All the great wonderful things that took place within the city, the things that made it a great city, it's gone. There's all warning here because there's nobody coming to the great feast. There's no one going in her gates. And when it's talking about the gates, we're talking about the place of business within the city. There's no business being taken place. Yeah, the health of a city is based on commerce, the economy within the city. And when there's no economy, there's no city. And he says it's gone. It says, our priests, they sigh, the virgins are afflicted. All there is bitterness. Verse 5, her adversaries are the chief. Her enemies prosper, for the Lord hath afflicted her. For the multitude of her transgressions, her children are gone into captivity before the enemy. You know, it's something that is interesting here. And it says that her adversaries are chief, her enemies prosper, for the Lord hath afflicted her. Something that when you go looking at the early days of Israel, and you see the other world events that are taking place around it, it is very obvious that when you look at it through the context of the Lord, that all these other nations are kind of busy with other things. That gives Israel a chance to really establish their foothold and to grow. And then by the time they're established, then the Lord's still working with them and helping them to defend against these other nations that are round about. That really what has changed here is not that the adversaries have changed, because Israel, throughout their history, it's not that their enemies have changed, it's that their relationship with the Lord has changed. Because they don't have the Lord on their side. The Lord, instead of protecting Israel, instead of strengthening Israel, has turned it upside down. Because, as he says, the multitude of her transgressions, because of the sins that are upon them. And because of that, people are gone into captivity. Verse 6, it says, and from the daughter of Zion all her beauty is departed. Her princes are become like harts that find no pasture, and they are gone without strength before the pursuer. That he makes a statement here that says all the beauty of Jerusalem is gone. Everything that made her great, wonderful. He describes that it's like her princes have become like harts that find no pasture. When it's a hart, we're talking about something that's like a deer or a stag, that there's nothing for them to go to do. They're alone. You know, I think of it gives me the picture. When I think of what should be the case with it, I think of Bambi, and at the end, I think of, or even at the beginning, and then you also see at the end, you have Bambi's father that's up on top of the mountain, staring off down over all the others. Bambi down at the bottom, and then later on, Bambi is up there with him, and you kind of have the feeling of him being over the top of the leader is something to take pride in, but if there's nothing there, it changes its image. It's just standing on top of the mountain. And that's what's happening here. And their strength, their pride, it's gone. All of their greatness, everything makes them a wonderful nation, a wonderful city. It's gone. Now, you think about this. We've seen, as we've been looking at the prophecy, we've seen different times evidence of Israel's pride and their arrogance. Thinking about how great of a nation that they are, how great of a people they are. They were trusting in all of these things. They saw all of these things taking place. And some of them probably even thought that they were invincible as a nation. Confident in the strength that we'll survive. We'll see. At Jeremiah, talking about everything being gone. We'll make it. But now it's all gone. And think about this from Jeremiah, looking at it, knowing the greatness of Israel, knowing the history of Israel as well. Knowing where they came from and what the Lord did with them in the beginning and could have done it. Even, you'll look just as previously with Josiah, you see others as well, that the greatness of it. It's all gone. I think of Jeremiah looking at all of this and knowing how great Jerusalem, how great Judah could have been as a nation if they had just turned around. If they just changed things and committed to what actually mattered. You'd see the greatness. Jeremiah's looking at it, he's thinking all they had to do was follow the Lord and they could still be here. The nation could still be a strong nation, but instead they're all taken from their homes or dead. Continuing in verse 7, it says, in Jerusalem, remembered in the days of her affliction, of her miseries, all her pleasant things that she had in days of old, when her people fell into the hand of the enemy, and none did help her. The adversary saw her and did mock at her Sabbaths. You look at this, and it's talking about Jerusalem, their affliction, and reminiscing how much better things were. Oh, the old days. They're now gone. And that they fell into the hand of the enemy, and that there were none to help them. Notice this, even then the adversary saw her and did mock at her Sabbaths. They mocked and they ridiculed. They ridiculed the things that were supposed to be something that set them apart, pointed to strength. You know, many would look at the Sabbaths. The heathens would look at the Sabbaths as a nation that's weak because you're giving up a day that you could be spending making your nation better. But when they did it properly under the Lord, it made them better because the Lord blessed them. Because the Lord provided for them. But if they had been doing things the right way, following the Lord the right things, the things that were their ridicule would have been a glorifying of the Lord. Instead, right? Jerusalem hath grievously sinned, therefore honored her, despise her, because they have seen her nakedness, yea, she sigheth and turneth backward. Because of the grievous sounds of them, those that before were her great friends are now hate her. because the nakedness that is revealed in Leviticus 9, it says her filthiness is in her skirts. She remembereth not her last end. Therefore, she came down wonderfully. She had no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy hath magnified himself. Notice this, that it talks about the filthiness in her skirts, and that she remembered not her last end. They were doing all of these things. They were consuming all of this sin. They were doing all these wonderful things, ignoring what the consequences of those sins would be, what the end would be. Because the Lord told them from the very beginning as a nation, He told them how they were going to be prosperous and what would happen if they did not do it. He said, hey, follow me, make me your king. Even whenever they went and got another king, and Saul, He said, still make me your king. Still follow me. Still trust in me. Because if you don't, your end is going to be destruction. He told them as a nation, and Jeremiah and the previous prophets, they told them, hey guys, if you can continue in this sin, your end is going to be destruction. Look, just years previous, Israel was destroyed. And they were told, Judah was, when the Assyrians came through, and they went rampant all the way across Israel, the 10 tribes of Israel, and then they came into Judah, and they were just going all over Judah, and they were about to win, and the Lord stopped them at Jerusalem. That was meant to be a picture to them, to show them, hey guys, if you don't change what you're doing, your end is going to be the same as Israel. Your end is going to be the same as all of them. And the Lord told them that. He said, change. This should be evidence to you that without my help, you are going to lose. You will be destroyed. You need me. But it didn't last. They ignored it. So, they met their end. The end for anybody that continues to ignore their sins and ignore the Lord, those that do not trust in the Lord, the end is eternity in hell. To ignore that, for whatever you're getting now, that's the end. Take it seriously. The end of sin in every way, shape, and form is death. Destruction. Even for the saved person, if you walk in this life in sin, you'll end up with destruction of this life. You won't lose your salvation, but there will be destruction, there will be problems here. Because sin in of itself, without the Lord's punishment, sin causes consequences that are negative. The Lord can choose, and He will, if you refuse Him long enough, the Lord can choose to put extra consequences onto that. Punishments. But sin in and of itself, without the Lord doing anything, sin has consequences that destroy us. That's why the Lord doesn't like them. That's why He's against them, because they hurt us. They damage us. We could sit here all night talking about the ways of sin and the destruction that comes from all of these different things. The sin destroys. Sin is death. Verse 10. The adversary hath spread out his hand upon all her pleasant things, for she hath seen that the heathen entered into her sanctuary, whom thou didst command that they should not enter into thy congregation. We continue with this, and we see the destruction, the affliction within this. you see here that it says that the adversary has spread out his hand among all her pleasant things, all the valuables of Israel, of Jerusalem. What we saw just right at the end of Jeremiah, all of the loot that Babylon took. Notice here it says that the heathen entered into her sanctuary, whom they did command that they should not enter into that congregation. What happened? They were able to go into the temple to plunder it. The temple was supposed to be a place that was sanctified, that was separated, that the heathen were not allowed into. But the Lord, He didn't protect it anymore because they had already removed its sanctification. Because they were already walking in their sin. You see, they weren't heathen as in their lineage, but they were heathen in the way that they were acting. It had already been corrupted whenever the Babylonians came into it. This take place because they corrupted their nation. Because they corrupted their lives. This never would have happened had they just stayed with the Lord. They just stopped going after all these things that were in the Bible. Verse 11. And so it says, all her people sigh. They seek bread. They have given their pleasant things for meat to relieve the soul. See, O Lord, and consider, for I have become vile. All of their pleasant things, all of their wealth, all of their value, it's gone. And they've turned it all over. It's all been sacrificed just for a little bit of food. They lost it all. If they just chosen to continue following the Lord. Seeing their hunger, seeing their destruction, seeing all the ways that everything's defiled. It's all their sin. It's all. Continuing to see the agony of Judah, verse 12. Is it nothing to you, all ye that pass by? Behold and see if there be any sorrow like unto my soul, which is done unto me, wherewith the Lord hath afflicted me in the day of his fierce anger. From above hath he sent fire into my bones, and it hath prevaileth against them. He hath spread a net for my feet, he hath turned me back. He hath made me desolate and faint all the day. He describes the sorrow that is here. He says, behold, and see if there be any sorrow like unto my sorrow, which is done unto me. Is there any case that is worse than this? A sorrow that is so great, like no other. It's all because of the Lord. But notice that the Lord is doing it because of His anger. Because of His anger with their sin. He says in 13, here from above, hath He sent fire into my bones, that it prevaileth against me. What happened to Jerusalem? After the Babylonians were successful, they razed it. They burned it all to the ground. Everything burned. Wow. And it says, that is a net for my feet, hath He turned me back. Israel was unable. I ask you this question: how well could you fight if your feet are tangled up in a net? Not well at all. What is being talked about here is that the Lord actively working against them. Well, it's interesting, or not really interesting, but you look at different parts in Israel's past, and you see things that make it obvious that the Lord is on their side, making things work. But in this case, the Lord is on the other side, making things not work, making things harder. It makes him desolate and thankful today. I want you to think about this. For years and years, abuse the mercy of God in the form of His patience. For years, He was patient, He was long-suffering, and He said, guys, you need to change, you need to change, you need to change. I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you proof that if without my help, you would lose. You got to change. And they kept taking advantage of it over and over and over again. Giving glory to these false gods, giving glory to themselves, saying, hey, we did this. That's gone. They abused God's mercy, His patience, and now they feel His wrath, abundance. You see verse 14, it says, the yoke of my transgressions is bound by His head. They are wreathed and come upon my neck. He hath made my strength to fall. The Lord hath delivered me from into their hands, from whom I am not able to rise up. Now, I think about this. What does Christ tell us about His yoke? That it's light. His burden is easy. The Lord was the strength of Israel. And He removed that strength, and so now their burden is too much. It's too heavy. The yoke of their transgressions, the sin that was upon them, the sin so great that they can't stand up against it. And the Lord stopped holding them up. It pulled them down to the ground. If you put too much weight on your shoulders, there's only one thing that happens. Fall. The Lord just delivered them into their transgressions. And I talked about that sin itself has consequences without the Lord doing anything. We've seen it even in looking at the prophets. There's been different times where the Lord's basically just made the comment, I'm just going to give them over into their sin. I'm just going to let their sin do what sin does. Destruction. Now, He did a lot to bring it in, but the Babylonians and their sin, they were destroying people without the Lord telling them to. That was what they wanted to do. The Lord just allowed them to continue on through Judah. If Judah had been with the Lord and he'd been following the Lord could have just stopped them. Sin is all-consuming, and without the Lord to pick it up, all it results in is our destruction. It's falling down from the weight of it all. And that's what happened. So that they weren't even able to rise back up. And look at this 15, the Lord hath trodden underfoot all my mighty men in the midst of me. He hath called an assembly against me to crush my young men. Trodden the virgin, the daughter of Judah, as in a winepress. Tread them down to nothing. What happens when something is on the path and is completely walked down? It's packed, it's pounded into nothing. And He says, all my mighty men, all the strength that they had, it's just pummeled into nothing. The strongest of materials with enough pressure will eventually flatten. Lord, just let it fall on top of me. 16, we see the sorrow. 16, it says, "For these things I weep. Mine eye runneth down with water, because the Comforter that should relieve my soul is far from me. My children are desolate, because the enemy prevailed. Zion spreadeth forth her hands. There is none to comfort her. The Lord hath commanded concerning Jacob that his adversaries should be round about him. Jerusalem is as a menstruous woman among them." He describes Judah here now. The sorrow that there is just a constant running down of water because their comforter, which is the Lord, is far from them. He's not going to relieve them. He's not going to lift them back up from it because their sin is turned away. He's walked away. Even with these things that are taking place, if they had been with the Lord would be able to bring them back up from it. He'd be able to help them prosper again. And sorrow is just so great. Verse 18 says, "The Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against His commandment. Hear, I pray you, all people, and behold my sorrow, my virgins and my young men are gone into captivity." "I called for my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and mine elders gave up the ghost in the city, while they brought their meat to relieve their souls." We see here a prayer that begins to the Lord, a recognition, first here, of their rebellion against the Lord. The rebellion that resulted in the Lord taking them back, taking them all away. All those that would allow them to be able to grow the virgins and young men, they're gone. There's no way for them to rebuild. The Babylonians, they took everybody of value back to the captive, back with them. There was nothing left to build back with. And he says, I called for my lovers, but they deceived me. Those false idols that they thought so great, they couldn't do anything. The priests, the elders, the ones that would have been able to lead them, or should have been able to lead them back into it, they're all gone. There's no leaders to help either. And you need the energy of the young and the wisdom of the old to accomplish things, and they've got neither. Verse 20. It says, "Behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled, mine heart is turned within me, for I have grievously rebelled. Abroad the sword bereaveth, at home there is as death. They have heard that I sigh, there is none to comfort me. All mine enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that thou hast done it. Thou wilt bring the day that thou hast called, and they shall be like unto me." It's about the distress Judah is in. Their bowels troubled, their heart turned within them. And stress is a very strong affliction. At least the turning sensation within our belly and our heart is given up. And this is what he's talking about here, that there's no end to this. There's no answer to it. Things are just bad. It's because of their rebellion. You know, time and time again, I've seen people that choose to walk down the path of sin and make these choices, and I even myself have made some poor choices and walking in it, and there's destruction that happens, and there's stress that comes as a result of that, and worry. It's because of sin. And without the Lord to bring you back out of it, how else are you going to deal with it? You know how many times I respond to problems that I have with, the Lord's got it. It makes things a little bit lighter. It's not work. But when you don't have the Lord on your side, things are totally different. There's no comfort. Enemies, notice this says, all my enemies have heard of my trouble, and they are glad that thou hast done it. Enemies are looking at them and glad that they were destroyed. You know, their enemies should have been looking at Israel and going, wow, the Lord is so powerful. But now they're going, glad to see them fall. And so in 22, we see our request. Verse 22, it says, let all their wickedness come before thee, and do unto them as thou hast done unto me. For all my transgressions, for all my sighs are many, and my heart is faint. We see here this request that all of their wickedness will be answered to by the Lord as well. And what this is showing is an acknowledgement of the wickedness of Judah that is justified. It's justified. It's how the Lord's going to respond to these others. Their response will end up being the same thing as what happened with Judah. And that's the end of all those that refuse the Lord. An end with sighs and the heart that is faint. Nothing. You see, the end of following the Lord, of not following the Lord, is destruction. It's the Lord's anger, it's the Lord's punishment, the Lord's wrath. The lake of fire is nothing more than the Lord's wrath. And that is the end to those that reject the Lord. The end of all sin is destruction. Whatever you want to trust in and whatever you want to look to, the solution to look to God. We have